Alright, welcome back to another Patreon critique. This is by Zac Bender. Sent me 3 different images. And what we got is character design. It's pretty cool. Things I do like. I'm going to talk about the good stuff first. And I do like this one probably the most because it has a lot of design details and elements that, require thinking. So I think I really appreciate this one. You look at the storytelling elements. I mean, like, why does this character have these beast faces and statues, and it's really cool. And we have an android character here. This one's cool. It has a different ideation for what the masks look like, so that's pretty useful, and even includes the crossbow, so that's apparently her weapon of choice. But the one thing that stands out to me is the posing of the characters, and I guess the samurai probably has the most interesting pose out of the 3, but still what I'm going to do is kind of sketch on top of them, and then move on to the next idea that I have when I look at these. So I'm going to sketch on this real quick, and then I'll talk about what I did. Alright, so the first thing I did was I wanted to have all of the weight, or well, most of the weight of the character kind of going into one leg, and I put it on this leg over here. Because if we look at the original drawing, it's kind of, these poses do exist in real life, obviously, but the weight is kind of distributed evenly, and I think things are slightly more interesting when they're off balance, or it's leaning onto one side, kind of like we have here. So this leg is kind of holding most of the weight, and this is kind of acting as a supporting weight, supporting leg. And then I sketched on top of it what the musculature could look like, and then from here you can move on and add those the pieces of armor accordingly. And if your anatomy feels good, if your pose feels right, then the armor will naturally look good to go. Something like that. Now, if this is for a design, it's perfectly fine. If it's a concept, it communicates the content perfectly. But I think the terms of rendering, and this might be in terms of style, but I think where you use black, like for example this here in the armor area, instead of shading down to black, I would take that same color and actually change it. So we do make it darker, but then change it to something more bluish, like that, like a lavender, so that when you go darker, you still retain color, like that. And you could still make that a little bit darker too. But the point is, with this method, you don't lose saturation into the darks and the blackness. So if we were to do that with the red, let's see what we can do. Now with the red, it's working kind of in an opposite way. So the most saturation in red is usually in the darks, but as you get brighter, it tends to get pink, or kind of like this color, and that loses saturation. So what I like to do is increase the hue towards an orange. So if we take that on a new layer and let it fill in the dark area, or I'm sorry, the light areas by hitting darken. I know it sounds backwards, but and it's a subtle change, but now within these highlights we still have a bit of saturation instead of losing it, and it's especially obvious for something like this. And I mentioned it before in my color tutorial. It's like stair-stepping colors. So if you start with red, the next color would be an orange if you want to go brighter, and then once again, if you want to go brighter, it goes to yellow instead of something like this. And that's kind of stair-stepping so that you maintain saturation. What I mean by that is these feel more colorful than this because this is losing the red. Now if we blend this in together like that, it still works very well with each other, especially having that middle orange happening right here before you transition into yellow. Whereas up here we lose that kind of interesting saturation. So if we look at these ribbons down here, they feel a bit nicer. Lion head here, instead of going to black when you're rendering it, we could have that as the main base color, and as we're getting darker, we change the hue down to more of the reds, and you let that fill in. Let's make that a little bit darker. And automatically it starts to give a little bit more dimension to the figure, well, I mean, the form. I'd even put some saturation in the highlights there, kind of like that. Also, you can use that same method for making the reflections in his, I'm assuming that this is gold, in his helmet here. Do you have something to say, Omar?
What? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a cool samurai. My friend Omar's here. What do you think?
I didn't know I was allowed to be here.
Yeah. So right now I'm using color dodge to add a bit of saturation and glow on the yellows using that dark kind of orange brown.
Wait, is color dodge not normal dodge? Is that in like a different menu? Is that just a brush?
It's a blending mode over here.
Oh, it's a blending mode.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Shit.
You can get similar effects using overlay.
That's crazy.
So yeah. Oh, also one more thing. The shadows. So a quick easy way to do the shadows. Alright, selected that. Now it's on its own layer. I'm going to select it again, or even just duplicate it, Control J, and the one below it, so now there's two copies. Lock the transparency, and let me turn off the one above it, and I fill it in. Oh, wrong color. Let's do the something like this. Alright, now this is on its own layer, and let's turn this one back on. I'm going to hit Control T and transform it down to the floor here. And I think you already did something similar to that, but here's how I would do it. Well, let me clean up that floor first. Okay, so now it's a sharp shadow, but I do want it to get blurry towards the back, sort of how shadows would normally act. So what I'm going to do is hit Q with the gradient tool on. Now what this does is enables quick mask mode. Now if I do this with the gradient, and with the gradient I have the black to transparency selected, it's going to do a red mask, right? And when I hit Q again, it will select the inverse of that. So I'm going to do that again, and hit Q, drag the gradient tool up like this, because I want this stuff selected in a sort of gradation. So I'm going to hit Q again, and I'm going to blur that using Gaussian blur. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Maybe, I mean, you could use lens blur. Doesn't really matter. Smart blur, no, not smart blur. Motion blur can work. And let's just fix that again on the floor. And maybe do a repeat. There you go. That's how I would do shadow. I also think the background could use some variation. Maybe it seems like it's bright all throughout. Maybe pick one side to be darker. Yeah, something like that. And I see you do have some rim lights now that we made that background darker. You can really see them. Oh wait, no, that's not. That was just from my selection. It looks like it's rim light coming. No, you do have rim light. Okay, so what I would do there is amplify it using color dodge, and it helps sell the idea of form. Maybe lower the opacity on that. So that would be my crit for this. This one's proportions seem a little bit off. Not off, I mean, surely there's this in real life. Also, I wanted to mention, definitely do some hand studies by, I would look at J.C. Leyendecker, and I've actually done a hand study tutorial on this before, so check that one out. So I sketched on top of the existing drawing, kind of like what I've gotten used to in terms of probably more stylized proportions, and you can find this kind of, it's not some kind of canon rule, but it's kind of spaced out in a certain way that I guess it's a habit. So I just tried doing that, and if I was to take these parts and then rearrange them onto my drawing, let's see how that looks, because the size of the head is very dependent on the rest of the proportions of the size of the body, and you can find this in cartoons, Disney characters, and all that stuff. So let's see how it works. So when I put these next to each other, you can pretty much tell that the proportions do make a difference, and these are the subtleties that I think are important to try and understand. Surely it's not perfect, it's just a quick kind of paint over, but try to practice these kinds of things. What I like to do is actually take examples of existing art and try and figure out the proportions of the ones that I think are working well. But by doing that, you can kind of just take any drawing and say, okay, well, what's the distance between here and here, and then here's the belly button, here's where the clavicle is, and you kind of try to see like how far stuff is apart, because you have the iliac, anterior superior iliac spine as a landmark here, and you kind of figure out these distances, and from that you can kind of start to notice a pattern of how far things are apart, and that's pretty much what defines the proportions of things. Then you see like, okay, well, here's the head, and you say, well, how many of these heads can fit in the torso, right? And that kind of thing. So 2.5. And the more practice of that you do, the more you pick up on different proportions and different styles. And just, I say, pick the styles that you like and then do that kind of study on top of it. And the same things I talked about color here also apply here. And as I look at this, it's probably too colorful, so I'm actually going to take that and lower saturation a bit. Yeah, that's better. This one also, with posing, I think is a big deal. By the way, the posing on this one is fine because it's obviously an orthographic or some kind of model sheet that has the different masks, the crossbow, all the details. So yeah, it's okay to show it like this, but these seem like kind of more posed, so that's how I'm treating them. And so the pose for this, again, it's a bit even, so I kind of want to see the weight shifted to one side. And I know he's like a android robot, but you could still maybe have a hunch, he's hunching over or something like that. So, all right, so since his left arm is really heavy, or it looks really heavy, maybe have him leaning towards that or onto it. So I would maybe, where these line up like that, I would tip it so it's like this. So one leg's going to be up here, the other's down there, which of course ends up changing how the rest of his body reacts to that. And that would make this shoulder lower and this shoulder higher as a sort of compensation. And then the head would lean also this way to kind of compensate for it. So it's a subtle thing. I mean, it almost has not much of a difference, but you see how the angles of those two lines sort of make a slight imbalance, and I think that's what makes things a little bit more interesting, instead of a perfect line here and a perfect line there. And so that's what I would say about the posing for that one. I think the same thing about the color. I think it seemed to be shading into black. Instead, you can shift the color down, something like that, and let that be the dark part in the shadows. That's why they always say, don't shade with black. Rather, change the color and make the color a different hue and saturation, as well as value. I would like to see some just spot highlights, maybe little hot spots here and there, and the metal, the shiny areas. It looks like you already got that going, but I would kind of kick it up a little bit. Yeah, it's a subtle difference. Alright, that's pretty much all I can offer for this one for now, and I hope that helped, and feel free to check out more of the videos on YouTube and for the Patreon critiques, and if you're interested in one, feel free to check out the link for the Patreon thing. And I am going to bed. Alright, clickaroo.